Hey y'all, welcome to Sandy's Library. I'm Sandy and I have decided that I would like to share my books with the world. And y'all know the easiest way that I can think of for me to do that is to read them on camera and then upload the videos to YouTube. And since I can no longer read out loud for hours on end, each video is probably going to consist of 1 or 2 chapters. And so we're going to go ahead, and I think it's a little bit serendipitous if we start with the last book I ever wrote, If I Had Married You. And once again, I just want to remind y'all, this is not a professional production. Just the author reading her books, okay? So, If I Had Married You, a novel, copyright 2018, written and read by Sandra Edwards. Have you ever looked into a stranger's eyes and got caught there, feeling like you'd found a part of yourself that you never knew was missing? And when you finally did manage to look away, all you wanted to do was look back into the stranger's eyes again, because it felt like home. This story, at its core, is not unlike so many other love stories out there. You know the type. 2 people meet, fall hopelessly and helplessly in love, and then are torn apart by circumstance. Most people will heal and find love again with someone new. A few may even end up reuniting, some sooner than others, to live out their happily ever afters. But sadly, there are those who will spend the rest of their lives mourning the loss of their soulmate. It is for these people that I tell this story. It is for them that we take this magical journey into the edge of imagination where hope intersects with what if. Prologue. Every once in a while, something triggers my memories. It can be a song, a smell, something I see on TV. Hell, every time I see a commercial for the Army, I think of you. And every time somebody calls me sweetheart, sugar, or darling, my heart dies a little. My grandmother once told me, there comes a point in a person's life when you realize that life has passed you by. You've spent your entire childhood and the bulk of your adulthood dreaming about what your life was going to be like. So make it a good one, because before you know it, you'll wake up one day and for the life of you, you just don't recognize the face in the mirror. It looks familiar, but you just can't seem to place it. And it takes you a few seconds, then it hits you. I can confirm that it's painful when you realize that it's just a much older version of yourself. She said it happened to her when she was in her early 50s. She also told me to make sure that the loss of my youth was my only regret. She said that if I ever found a man who could melt my temper with just a smile, I'd better hold on to him tight. For the saddest thing in life, she said, is a lonely old woman prompting a ghost from her past with the loneliest inquiry of all. If I had married you. Part 1. Romance and all that jazz. Chapter 1. We were married on a Friday, but wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back to when we met. You laugh when I tell this story, but I love it. I find it very romantic. It was April Fool's Day, and I was close to wrapping up my 2nd year as an elementary school teacher in Paradise Grove, Texas. You were fresh out of OCS, and your first duty assignment brought you to Fort Mitchell, located on the outskirts of the city. I think about fate a lot and how we would never have met if it hadn't been for my cousin Samantha meeting and marrying this Army lieutenant, Jason Stevens, whom everybody, including Samantha and myself, called Steve, after this whirlwind romance. Luckily for me, as it just so happened, he turned out to be a good friend of yours. I'll never forget that day in late March. She showed up at my apartment about a month after getting married with the intent to set me up on a blind date. You were new in town and needed a date for the battalion commander's barbecue coming up the following weekend. I just stood there in my living room staring at her, trying to gauge what I was blindly walking into. Her face was giving nothing away, but I'd been burned before, so I asked, "What's he look like?" I know it's superficial, but I was looking for romance, and how can you have romance if you're not physically attracted to your partner? Samantha stood there, peering at me with those big doe eyes of hers. It might work on Steve, but I was immune. Finally, she said with a hint of a shrug, "I don't know. I've never met him, but Steve says all the girls flock to him wherever he goes." That last bit she said with this dramatic flair. "Oh, great," I huffed with a sigh. "You want to fix me up with Casanova." My cousin was one of those blonde bombshell types, and I later learned that you'd been reluctant to agree to the blind date because you weren't into the flashy type, and you were a little worried that that's what I'd turn out to be. Even so, you did show up at Colonel Jeffrey's house that afternoon. I'll admit, I had my doubts too, but there was also this little part of me that had a secret desire that you end up being a guy I couldn't wait to wrap myself around later that night. Really, that's all I've ever been looking for. Someone who made me light up like a Christmas tree whenever he walks into the room. Sadly, though, in all of my past experiences, that feeling has never lasted more than a month or two. I was 26, and I'd already decided I was destined to wander the planet alone in search of my soulmate, who obviously hadn't a clue as to where I was or how to find me. So, I had resolved to have myself as much fun as I possibly could. It was the hand that I'd been dealt, and I meant to make it a good one, just like my grandma had said. April 1st of that year was a typical spring day in Paradise Grove, minus the rain. Springtime always brought with it the rain. That's how the summers stayed so green in East Texas. But on that day the sun was shining, the temps were tolerable, and I was in a good mood. I tagged along with Samantha and Steve that day, instead of driving my own car because I was planning on drinking. We arrived at the Colonel's house about 15 minutes before I was set to rendezvous with you. So, while Steve introduced Samantha to the company commander, I slipped away to go scout out the reserves. Oh yeah, if my date turned out to be a dud, I figured I could find a suitable replacement among all these guys in attendance. Since first dates and blind dates made me nervous, I needed a drink. And, thanks to Captain Garcia's wife, I quickly learned just where I could find one. Shortly after we arrived, she pointed out the bar that had been set up along the far side of the backyard. I ordered myself a pomegranate martini, mainly because it seemed ladylike to be sipping on such a cocktail. I mean, I was dealing with officers after all. I took my drink, turned around, and leaned against the bar, sipping my pomegranate concoction. As I scanned the crowd, there were lots of people there, mostly men, and I learned from one possible runner-up that more than the officers of Echo Company were in attendance. Yes, I was taking notes, just in case. It's not like I encouraged him, but he followed me up to the back porch anyway. Ever since I'd spotted the swing in those 3 rocking chairs up there, I wanted to go sit in one so I could watch everybody while I waited for my date to arrive. I decided to let the runner-up hang around as long as he remained standing at the porch railing about 3 feet away from me. I was fine with it. His presence would help deter any other potential suitors while I waited for you to arrive. After all, he already knew I was meeting my date, so he shouldn't be too awfully shocked when you showed up and whisked me away. As he chatted at me, I made it a point to show as little interest as possible in what he was saying. There was no use encouraging him. He already knew where I stood. I had a date, but to avoid coming off as a snob, I'd nod at him every once in a while. I checked my watch, partly wondering how long I'd been there and partly to remind him about my date, 20 minutes had passed since I'd arrived, and I figured my date was probably out there somewhere by now. So I tipped my sunglasses up and propped them on my head as I gazed out over the crowd and pondered that age-old question, which one is mine? The back door opened and I glanced over my shoulder to see who was coming out. For a split second, I wondered if I might get a scolding for sitting on the porch. No one else was. Yes, I was slightly anxious. I had pinned all my hopes on that day on you being the one, even though I knew the odds weren't in my favor. I'm not sure when my runner-up left the porch. I doubt it took long, though, once she stepped through the door. He had to know right away that if you weren't my date, then my date was getting dumped. It was more than an attraction between you and me, and it was stronger than anything I'd ever experienced. It's hard to explain what happened to me at that very moment when my eyes first locked with yours, but I'll try. I ponder the memory of it, but the exact feeling is elusive, unless I'm actually looking into your eyes. I don't think I can describe it, but I can tell you how it made me feel. Have you ever looked into a stranger's eyes and got caught there, feeling like you found a piece of yourself that you never knew was missing? And when you finally did manage to look away, all you wanted to do was look back into the stranger's eyes again, because it felt like home. See, what it all boils down to is, I was and still am in awe of you. I'm in awe of your rugged good looks, your confidence, your composure, and your intelligence. That's why I write this love letter to you now, because, as you know, I get flustered anytime I try to tell you how I feel. I guess you could say I was smitten from the get-go. That's a feeling that has yet to leave me. That sort of thing has never happened to me before or since, so I was caught off guard on Colonel Jeffrey's back porch that day. All I could do was stare. You were very magnanimous, though. While you were the one who broke our gaze first, it was just for a second when you glanced at the rocking chair by my side and asked, "This chair taken?" And your eyes were right back on me, invading my senses and stirring my soul. All I knew was, you'd better be my date or he was indeed getting ditched. At that moment, it hit me. I had to find out if I needed to make plans to leave sooner rather than later. So I asked, "What's your name, soldier?" Honestly, though, neither of us had any room to be mad at the other. From the second our eyes locked, we both knew we'd be leaving the Colonel's house together, no matter who we were supposed to be there with. And it's not that either of us could ever have been categorized as mean-spirited or shallow, but our connection was just so strong, unbreakable even, and it was instant. Over the course of an afternoon barbecue, you and I became acquainted. I remember your smile. It seemed a little like pride, at least to me, when I told you I was a music teacher at a local elementary school. I could easily guess that you were in the Army, but I wanted to know the particulars. I wanted to know everything there was to know about you. I got a taste of your humor when I asked you what you did for a living. Do you remember what you said to me? It went something like, "I defend this country against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and employees of the Paradise Grove School District." I'll confess I fell a little bit in love with you right at that moment. After meeting you, I discovered how important it was to have someone in your life who could make you laugh. Plus, it didn't seem to bother you that I was a couple of years older than you. We were pretty much polar opposites, you and I, coming from different races and different parts of the country. I could tell right away, though, that you were a true leader, even if with me you were a little bit shy. As for me, well, I hardly ever took anything seriously, and I was not shy at all. But you and I, we did have one very important thing in common. We could not keep our hands off each other. As the afternoon wound down, I started thinking about how I was going to get this date of ours to continue on into the evening. Even though you'd stuck by my side since our eyes first locked, and you'd even kissed me twice, both times when you thought nobody was looking, still, We made no move to continue the date beyond the barbecue, even after the Colonel's guest list had dwindled considerably. I attributed this to your shy nature. Boy, was I wrong. You were simply sitting back and reeling in the hot redhead, as you'd put it, and there I was, thinking that you were so shy. It's a damn good thing that Samantha came over and said to us, "Karaoke tonight?" or I would have had to make a gigantic fool out of myself. I looked at you. "Karaoke? You want to come?" I asked, splashing on a salacious tone. You said, "I'll come watch." Besides, then you laughed and said of Samantha's husband, "I'd like to see Stevens in action." I knew what you meant. We'd all heard the story. The night the newlyweds met, Samantha and I were supposed to go out, but I was fighting a fierce cold, and my stuffed-up head wouldn't agree to leave the house, much less go to a bar. Samantha could never resist karaoke night, so she went solo. I wasn't surprised to hear that she picked up the mic and asked for a volunteer, preferably male, to help her sing her favorite duet, "Ain't No Mountain High Enough." And we're talking about the Marvin Gaye and Tammy Terrell version, too. And, as they say, the rest is history. But I digress. Back to us. That evening, we ended up at a local nightclub not far off post. When it comes to karaoke, Samantha typically grabs the mic as soon as she downs a shot or two. Now me, it takes me a little bit longer to work up the courage. Singing in front of little kids is far easier than a room full of grown-up drunks. For this reason, Samantha sometimes sings 4 or 5 songs before I get up the nerve to tackle my first. That night was no exception. I wouldn't exactly call myself shy, but I did and still do have a fear of embarrassing myself in public. But worse than that, I didn't want to embarrass myself in front of you. Of course Samantha knows my trigger. The one song that'll drag my butt up on stage every time. The old Chicago tune called Dialogues Part 1 and 2. After I laid the mic down and returned to the table, I still remember what you said to me. "Damn, girl." You took my hands and laced your fingers with mine. "You can sing." I've had compliments on my voice before and after, but none have meant quite so much to me as that one. I leaned toward you, and my lips brushed against your cheek as I said, "Thanks. Do you sing?" You said, "I've been known to." You pulled back to look at me, with the right kind of motivation. "Okay," I shrugged. "What's it gonna take?" "That's your best bargaining chip?" you asked in a half-serious, joking way. "Okay," I said again, but this time I was in the game. "How about a dram of Glenmorangie?" I could tell by the way your eyes lit up that you knew what I was talking about. You think the bartender even knows what that is? I did one of those half-shoulder shrugs and said, "I'll confess, when I ordered the last round, I saw a bottle behind the bar sitting way high up on the top shelf." You nodded your head as you said, "That would probably do the trick." "Great," I said, standing up. "I'm going to go get you a drink. Go pick your song." And then you stood and reached for your wallet. You were such a gentleman. My heart swelled with delight. It's not that I was looking for someone to buy me drinks, but it's nice when you run across a gentleman. Grandma always said, there's nothing better than a handsome, well-mannered man, and if he comes in uniform, all the better. Grandma was right. She would be pleased, I thought, as I gazed at you. After 2 drams, neither of which you would let me buy, you went to have a chat with the DJ. I didn't expect Steve and a couple of the other platoon leaders from the barbecue to join you center stage, and based on Samantha's reaction, she wasn't expecting it either. It was at that moment that I realized that I'd been had. All Samantha and I could do was sit there in awe as you and your friends did your thing to Dion's Runaround Sue. I'd been on the hook since the barbecue, but when you hopped off that stage and sat down at the table while still singing to me, that's when I jumped firmly on the line. I'm pretty sure you can guess when I got to the sinker bit. You remember that moment when I fell hook, line, and sinker, don't you? If you can't quite recall, I'll give you a hint. It happened on the worst day of our lives. But again, I digress. Anyway, since you targeted me as Sue, I had no recourse but to retaliate. And I did so in grand fashion with an old hard-talking country song about love gone wrong called Blame It on Your Heart. When it was over, you came to me, took my face in your hands, and kissed me. It was the kind of kiss that said, "You're mine tonight." That's when I bit the bullet and asked, "Would you do a duet with me?" "I'd be honored," you said. "What song do you have in mind?" "Jackson." "Johnny Cash?" you asked with a touch of eagerness. I could tell right away that you were a fan of country music. I just didn't realize until later that you preferred it over rock and roll. Polar opposites, you and me. Honestly, I've never been much for country music, but I do like Johnny and Patsy Cline, especially when it comes to karaoke. Over the years, you and I have become sort of quasi-famous for our rendition of Jackson, as we really pour it on thick. People love it. I've lost count of how many times we've been asked and accommodated the request to perform it at some social function or another. That and "Baby It's Cold Outside." I don't think we've ever skipped a holiday without performing that tune somewhere. Chapter 2. We were married 11 weeks and 6 days after we met. Yes, it was impromptu, but we both thought it was what needed to happen. And I remember the day we came to the conclusion so very clearly. Early in our courtship, we found Graceland Park along the south side of Davy Pond, a man-made body of water on post. To the north end of the pond were newly remodeled housing for married officers and their families. Remember when we used to take a blanket, a picnic basket, and a couple of books and spend a lazy afternoon lounging under that colossal magnolia tree? I loved those afternoons. But not this particular one. I was nervous as hell to tell you what I had to tell you. But I had to tell you. This was not one of those things that could be easily ignored. You'd laid out the blanket, stored our picnic basket next to us at the trunk of the tree, and even though summer was wafting in on that crisp June day with its heavenly smells of jasmine and wisteria and magnolia and pine, but I was afraid, scared to death, fearful of what you were going to say. I mean, hell, we had our whole lives in front of us, and we'd both just started down our very different career paths. You'd been through a lot to get to where you were, and you knew exactly where you were headed. I just wasn't sure if there was room for me and what I was bringing to the table. Instead of dropping down onto the blanket at your side, I strolled the 4 feet or so to the water's edge and settled my sights out there. The pond was too small for life-size boats, but a couple of soldiers had these little remote-controlled ones, and they appeared to be racing them while they laughed and had a great time. Nobody but me knew what I was going through, though, at that moment, but you caught on real quick that something was up. I remember feeling your arms slip around me from behind, then you pulled me back against your chest. I felt your kiss against the side of my head just before you said, "What's wrong, sugar?" I blew out a sigh as the tears welled in my eyes. I wanted so much for you to be happy about this, but I was afraid that you wouldn't. I sucked in a deep breath as I turned to face you, dragging my gaze up to meet yours. Your smile almost chased away my fears. Then I remembered and reminded myself that you didn't know what I knew, and there was no use in prolonging the inevitable any longer. So I said, "I'm pregnant." Your face froze for a moment or two. I thought it was incredible how you never lost your smile throughout the entire time it took you to process this information and mentally run through the conversations that we'd had about past lovers. You told me about breaking up with a longtime girlfriend a couple of months before we met, and I told you that I hadn't dated anyone in almost a year. Then your smile slowly started to spread until it reached all the way up to your eyes, making them sparkle. You stood there for a while, just basking in my presence. A couple of times you glanced down at my belly, held your gaze there for a second or two, and then you let your eyes drift back up to my face. With your smile still intact, you said, "We're getting married." Admittedly, that was not how I had envisioned the way my future husband would propose to me, so I said, "Are you sure?" You were very diligent and thoughtful with your campaign to give our child a united home, though. Needless to say, you were very convincing. And you did make it up to me later, so you get a pass. The next day we got ourselves a marriage license, and the following Friday we were married at a little chapel in town. We couldn't go on a honeymoon because you had responsibilities to the Army, but your commanding officer did give you a 3-day pass when he found out that you were getting married. The ceremony was straightforward. You, me, the preacher, and Samantha and Steve as witnesses. You wore your dress uniform, and I had found a simple yet elegant gown that just so happened to fit me in this little bridal shop not far off post. Samantha got me a bouquet of white and red roses. It was also very basic, yet I knew on that day that something really special was happening. Remember after the ceremony when we went back to my place, officially our place now, and consummated our marriage? And afterwards we spent the rest of the afternoon and early evening lying on top of covers while you caressed my body while we talked about things like life, faith and family, and of course your career. But not much was said in the beginning about your military ties beyond. The Army controls my life, not me. They tell me where to go and when to go, and you have to be okay with that. The way I saw it, though, I didn't have a complaint coming. You were already in the Army when I met you. You know, I remember saying, after I have the baby, we're going to need a bigger place. My little one-bedroom apartment was going to get a little crowded, and sooner rather than later. You said, when we get your ID card, we'll check on the list for housing. You think we can get in? I asked. You glanced at my naked belly, then said, maybe, by the time you have a baby. Well, I said, I suppose we can always find a house off post. Then I added with a shrug, if we have to. On that day, we were riding high on the possibilities. Our life together was just getting started, and it was going to be the stuff that dreams were made of. The odds were in our favor. I was definitely infatuated with you, and I'm pretty sure that you were enamored with me. I already knew that you were a career man, and I felt fairly confident that the Army was a guaranteed source of income for our budding little family when, not if, but when, the Army decided to ship us off to somewhere else, and I'd have to leave my teaching job behind. I figured, if need be, I could always pick up a little extra cash by teaching piano and voice lessons, no matter where we were stationed. Plus, the sex was incredible, so what could go wrong?